They had never seen light like this. Not the warmth of the sun, not the cold glow of the moon. This light moved. It danced, crackled, and breathed like a living thing. It roared without a mouth. It burned without mercy. Before the wheel, before the bow, before names had meaning, there was fire. And when they saw it for the first time, wild, alive, untouchable, they didn't see flame. They saw power, mystery, and the voice of gods made real. Before fire, there was only darkness. And it wasn't just the absence of light, it was a living, breathing thing. It swallowed the forest whole, crept into the caves, curled beneath the hides they wrapped around their trembling bodies. The cold was not a passing breeze, it was a presence. It howled through jagged cliffs, pierced through fur and skin, and made even the strongest among them curl inwards, teeth chattering, eyes scanning the black for movement. They lived in fear of what they couldn't see. In the shadows lurked predatorsolent, patient, and merciless. Things with claws, with teeth, with eyes that glowed when the moonlight caught them just right. The Neanderthals had no word for monsters, but they knew what it meant to hear breathing when no one was there. To smell blood before any wound was made. To feel watched, hunted. They had no torches, no flames, no warmth but their own. The only light they ever knew was borrowed from the heavens, the cold silver of the moon, casting long, eerie silhouettes on the forest floor, the brief, violent flash of lightning, a warning more than an illumination. In that split second, the entire world would light up, cruel and surreal, only to vanish again and leave them more blind than before. Nights were endless. The dark seemed to stretch forever, swallowing time itself. They marked no hours, only survived until the sky began to pale. Every sound in the night was a threat. Every gust of wind might carry the scent of something worse. Their stories were not spoken, they were felt, passed down through scars and silence. A glance, a shiver, a scar running deep across the chest of a survivor who never spoke of what he saw. But then, one night, everything changed. The sky cracked open with a sound like the earth breaking in two. A bolt of white-hot light slammed into the forest, and in the silence that followed the thunder, a new kind of light remained. It didn't fade. It didn't vanish. It stayed, flickering, moving, glowing. They didn't know it yet, but the darkness they had always feared was about to lose its throne. And for the first time, they wouldn't have to survive the night alone. It struck like a god's fury without warning, without mercy. A blinding bolt of light ripped down from the sky, splitting a towering tree in half with a deafening crack. The sound echoed through the forest like a scream that didn't end. For a moment, time seemed to stutter. Then came the chaos. The forest exploded into motion. Birds shrieked and scattered in every direction. Leaves hissed as they curled into themselves. Smoke rose in a thick, twisting column, black and alien. The tree that once stood still and silent was now ablaze, and not just burning, it was alive. The Neanderthals froze. None of them had ever seen such colors. Yellow like sun-hardened clay, orange like drying blood, red like fresh kill. The flames danced and writhed, licking the air with long, hungry tongues. It roared not like an animal, but like something deeper, older, primal. It spoke a language they didn't understand but felt in their marrow. They didn't know whether to run or bow. One young male taller than the rest, eyes sharper, took a single step forward. His breath was ragged, his hands shaking. There was something pulling him, something ancient and magnetic. Curiosity burned in him like a second fire. He reached out, slowly, unsure. Another figure, older, cautious, grabbed his arm, trying to hold him back. A soft grunt of warning. But it was already too late. The pull was stronger than the fear. Stronger than tradition. Stronger than instinct. This wasn't just light. It wasn't just heat. It was something more, something alive, something sacred, something powerful. It moved like a creature, yet obeyed no laws of flesh. And though it could destroy in an instant, It invited them, dared them to come closer. The young male took another step. Around him, the others held their breath. No one spoke. No one moved. All eyes were locked on the burning tree. And in that moment suspended between fear and awe, they crossed an invisible line. They stepped out of the world they had always known and into something new. The age of fire had begun. They didn't rush toward it. They crept like prey animals testing the edge of a trap. The fire crackled, hissed, and spat tiny sparks into the night, each ember a glowing warning. It was beautiful, yes, but wild, unpredictable, dangerous. One young male stepped too close. A stray ember, no bigger than a pebble, landed on the top of his bare foot. In an instant, the skin sizzled. He screamed and stumbled back, clutching his leg, eyes wide with pain and shock. The others froze. No one moved. No one made a sound. Their eyes flicked from him, back to the fire. Pain, it was the first lesson. But then came the second. The wolves didn't come. For nights, they had stalked the shadows, growling, circling, waiting. But now, the predators kept their distance. They watched from the edge of the forest, their yellow eyes gleaming in the dark. The fire scared them, and the Neanderthals noticed. So they stayed close, not too close, but close enough to feel the warmth brush their skin, to see the world around them for the first time in flickering gold. That night, no one slept. They sat in a perfect circle, the silence between them sacred. The branch still burned in the center slowly, steadily. None dared to touch it again, but none would let it die either. Instinct took over. They began feeding it. Dry leaves, small twigs, bits of bark, even bones, whatever they could find. They didn't know what it wanted, but they gave it everything. And in return, it gave them something they had never known. Safety, light, a barrier between them and the nightmare of the night. But more than that, it gave them each other. For the first time, they saw the full shapes of the faces they'd lived beside, not as shadows, not as outlines, but as people, with eyes, with lines, with expression. The old man's sunken cheeks, the child's round eyes, the warrior's scar. And in those flickering reflections, something stirred. Not fear, not just awe. Respect. The fire wasn't just a threat now, it was something else. A presence, a protector, a god they could feed. They didn't know what it was, they had no name for it, no word for fire. But they knew deep in their bones that it was something unlike anything they had ever encountered. It could hurt them, yes. It had already burned flesh, frightened children, made the bravest warriors flinch. But it could also protect. It could warm. It could make the dark less terrifying. So they began to treat it with the care of something sacred. The strongest warrior sat closest to it, not to dominate it, but to defend it. He watched its movement like a sentinel watches the forest, guarding it from anything that might snuff it out. When the flames dropped low, a flicker of fear would pass through the group. They scrambled for dry kindling, whispered to one another in low, urgent tones. When the fire flared up again, they smiled relief washing over their faces like rain after drought. The oldest woman spoke to it. No one understood her words, but the way she moved slow, deliberate, reverent made it clear. She believed it listened. She fed it gently, blowing on embers with steady breath, shielding it from sudden winds. When others panicked, she remained calm, and the fire seemed to respond. It became more than warmth, more than safety. It became central. They circled it. They slept around it. Every morning, the first act was to check the flame. Every night, the last act was to feed it. Rain came and they learned to protect it. Stones were stacked to shield it from above. Bark and hide covered its heart. When travel was necessary, they cradled glowing embers in bowls of ash and bark, blowing on them gently to keep them alive. The smallest flicker became more valuable than meat, more sacred than tools. If the ember died, they mourned. If it survived, they celebrated. They didn't build shrines. They didn't offer prayers. But they watched, they guarded, they believed. And in time, they became something new. Not just survivors, not just hunters, but firekeepers, a people bound together by the shared duty of protecting a force they could not create, only carry. They didn't invent it, but they carried it across the earth. And in doing so, they carried the first god mankind ever knew. With fire came change. Not all at once, not in a single night, but slowly, irrevocably, like water carving stone. The beasts no longer approached their camps. The glowing light, the crackle of embers, the smoke curling into the sky, it was a language the wild understood. Stay away. For the first time, the hunted had found a shield. Meat no longer had to be torn raw from bone. Fire softened it, seared it, revealed flavors they had never known. Bellies stayed full longer, wounds healed faster. The warmth that once came only from skin and furs now pulsed from the center of their gatherings, steady, reliable, eternal. But it was more than survival. Around the fire, something strange began to happen. Shadows danced on cave walls, thrown there by flickering flames. They watched those shadows, fascinated not just because they moved, but because they told. A hand raised in front of the fire became a beast. 2 fingers became a horn. A gesture became a hunt, a warning, a memory. These were not just shapes. They were beginnings of stories, of language, of identity. They learned to use fire to shape not just their nights, but the world around them. Stones became sharper when heated. Clay hardened into vessels. Trees burned into paths. With fire, they didn't just live in nature, they began to shape it. And most importantly, they gained something no other creature had. Time. Time to stop running. Time to think beyond the next kill. Time to wonder why the stars moved, or why a baby cried in its sleep. Time to bury their dead, not just leave them. Time to remember. Fire gave them pause. It made stillness possible. It allowed thought to grow. Around the flame they spoke without words, stared long into the glow, and something within them shifted. They were no longer just surviving, they were imagining, dreaming, becoming. And it all began on that one night, the night they saw fire. A moment so small, so fragile, just a spark. But from that flicker came everything. Memory, meaning, myth. And in that flame, the first flicker of what would one day be called humanity. Today we think of fire as simple, a tool, a spark behind a stove, a flick of a switch. But for them, it was nothing less than a miracle. A force they couldn't name, couldn't control, only witness. It was alive, unpredictable, divine. They didn't just use fire, they revered it, feared it, protected it, passed it from hand to hand like a sacred secret. It warmed their bodies, lit their paths, changed their minds. And from that single glowing center, something extraordinary began to take shape. Around fire, they became more than survivors. They became storytellers, builders, dreamers. It was not just the birth of warmth, but the birth of meaning, the birth of memory, the birth of us. If ancient fire sparked your curiosity, subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows for more stories that lit the dawn of mankind.